Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth, with your host, the Green Bard. This is the Direwolves of Winterfell, episode 6.3, Snow Meets World, covering Jon and Ghost's bond from the trek to the Wall until Tyrion leaves the Wall. A Game of Thrones, Tyrion 2. In the next scene with Ghost, he attacks Tyrion. Tyrion is piling on Jon about how terrible the Night's Watch is, making him increasingly angry to the point of almost losing his temper. Ghost must feel this through the bond, so he would be extremely alert and ready to fight, aggressively. As soon as Tyrion makes a move in Jon's direction, he acted, flattening the dwarf and keeping himself between the boy and the dwarf. Tyrion thinks twice about Ghost's red eyes, their brightness seemingly a sign of the wolf's anger. Jon, realizing what was happening, holds the newfound power over the dwarf in a smiling fashion, rubbing Tyrion's nose in his position of weakness. He comically coerces Tyrion to ask him nicely to help him to his feet. The comedy continues when Tyrion wonders why Ghost attacked him, and Jon answers that he probably thought him a grumpkin. While this was funny, it distracts from the real answer to Tyrion's question. Clearly, the wolf is mirroring Jon's anger, as well as fulfilling his role as a protector, just in case the imp really had meant him harm. Note that Ghost didn't do any lasting harm, so even though he felt Jon's anger, he didn't let it cause him to be aggressive, like Shaggydog. This wasn't wild or vicious, it was protective. Still, Jon is quick to anger in this incident, as he was with Benjen, so that should be remembered going forward.
"Stop it," Jon Snow said, his face dark with anger. "The Night's Watch is a noble calling." Tyrion laughed. "You're too smart to believe that. The Night's Watch is a midden heap for all the misfits of the realm. I've seen you looking at Yorn and his boys. Those are your new brothers, Jon Snow. How do you like them? Sullen peasants, debtors, poachers, rapers, thieves, and bastards like you all wind up on the wall, watching for grumpkins and snarks and all the other monsters your wet nurse warned you about. The good part is there are no grumpkins or snarks, so it's scarcely dangerous work. The bad part is you freeze your balls off. But since you're not allowed to breed anyway, I don't suppose that matters." "Stop it!" the boy screamed. He took a step forward, his hands coiling into fists, close to tears. Suddenly, absurdly, Tyrion felt guilty. He took a step forward, intending to give the boy a reassuring pat on the shoulder, or mutter some word of apology. He never saw the wolf, where it was or how it came at him. One moment he was walking towards Snow, and the next he was flat on his back, on the hard, rocky ground. The book was spinning away from him as he fell, the breath going out of him at the sudden impact, his mouth full of dirt and blood and rotting leaves. As he tried to get up, his back spasmed painfully. He must have wrenched it in the fall. He ground his teeth in frustration, grabbed a root, and pulled himself back to a sitting position. "Help me," he said to the boy, reaching up a hand, and suddenly the wolf was between them. He did not growl. The damn thing never made a sound. He only looked at him with those bright red eyes and showed him his teeth, and that was more than enough. Tyrion sagged back to the ground with a grunt. "Don't help me then. I'll sit right here until you leave." Jon Snow stroked Ghost's thick white fur, smiling now. "Ask me nicely." Tyrion Lannister felt the anger coiling inside him, and crushed it out with a will. It was not the first time in his life he had been humiliated, and it would not be the last. Perhaps he even deserved this. "I should be very grateful for your kind assistance, Jon," he said, mildly. "Down, Ghost," the boy said. The direwolf sat on his haunches. Those red eyes never left Tyrion. Jon came around between them, slid his hand under his arms, and lifted him easily to his feet. Then he picked up the book and handed it back. "Why did he attack me?" Tyrion asked with a sidelong glance at his direwolf. He wiped blood and dirt from his mouth with the back of his hand. "Maybe he thought you were a grumpkin."
So aside from the glaring themes of protection, savagery, and mirroring, we also saw obedience and affection between the pair, and a repeat of the theme of Ghost's silence. Pack and separation are missing for this episode, but they'll come back into the story later in the series. A Game of Thrones, Jon 3. Once at the wall, Jon has a disagreement with his uncle about accompanying him on his ranging. Jon, in his anger, has a sickening vision of Benjen's death. He thinks that he's just wished his uncle dead and is upset with himself over it. But I would say, rather, that he may have been given a vision of what was to come. The symbolism of Ghost is that he is tied to the weirwoods. Could it be more than a metaphor? Could he have been a medium or conduit for this prophetic vision from the Weirwood Network? I couldn't say for sure, but I will say that Ghost is always around during these strange happenings, as at the end of this scene.
Jon rose at dawn the next day to watch his uncle leave. One of his rangers, a big ugly man, sang a bawdy song as he saddled his Garen, his breath steaming in the cold morning air. Ben Stark smiled at that, but he had no smile for his nephew. How often must I tell you no, Jon? We'll speak when I return. As he watched his uncle lead his horse into the tunnel, Jon had remembered the things that Tyrion Lannister told him on the King's Road, and in his mind's eye he saw Ben Stark lying dead, his blood red in the snow. The thought made him sick. What was he becoming? Afterward he sought out Ghost in the loneliness of his cell, and buried his face in his thick white fur.
Much later, Jon has a discussion with Tyrion which reinforces our fear that something indeed might have happened to Benjen. Before that, though, Jon mentions how Ghost scares the other boys, reminding us of our theme of the fearsomeness of the direwolves. After that, Ghost is used by Jon while making fun of Sir Alliser. Thing is, I have no doubt that Ghost could be taught to juggle, if he wished to be, and only if he had opposable thumbs.
It's better that I'm by myself, Jon said stubbornly. The rest of them are scared of Ghost. Wise boys, Lannister said. Then he changed the subject. Talk is, your uncle is too long away.
Later.
Alliser Thorne overheard him. Lord Snow wants to take my place now, he sneered. I'd have an easier time teaching a wolf to juggle than you will training this aurochs. I'll take that wager, Sir Alliser, Jon said. I'd love to see Ghost juggle. Jon heard Gren suck in his breath, shocked. Silence fell.
A Game of Thrones, Tyrion 3. Jon meets with Tyrion one more time before the little man goes back south. This meeting is rich in direwolf interaction. Ghost, alert and guarding, approaches Tyrion first and seems to assess him as no threat. Tyrion doesn't trust the tacit acceptance, though, and asks permission to pet Ghost. Smart man. Jon, confident in Ghost's obedience, assents. As he pets him, he remarks on the pup's growth, and on his eyes again. The joke about juggling is also brought up, and Jon gets a chance to brag about teaching the other boys. Later, as they walk together, Ghost is again shadowing Jon.
On the far side of the catapult, a muffled voice called out a challenge. Who goes there? Halt! Tyrion stopped. If I halt too long, I'll freeze in place, Jon, he said as a shaggy pale shape slid toward him silently and sniffed at his furs. Hello, Ghost.
Later.
This is the last place I would have expected to be seen, Tyrion admitted. I was captured by a whim. If I touch Ghost, will he chew my hand off? Not with me here, Jon promised. Tyrion scratched the white wolf behind the ears. The red eyes watched him impassively. The beast came up as high as his chest now. Another year, and Tyrion had the gloomy feeling he'd be looking up at him. What are you doing up here tonight? He asked, besides freezing your manhood off.
Later.
Tyrion grinned. And has Ghost learned to juggle yet? No, said Jon, smiling. But Gren held his own against Halder this morning, and Pip is no longer dropping his sword quite so often as he did.
Later.
The watch commander tells me I must walk to keep my blood from freezing, but he never said how fast. They walked, with Ghost pacing alongside Jon like a white shadow. I leave on the morrow, Tyrion said.
Note how Tyrion said in the passive voice that he was captured by a whim to go to the top of the wall, followed by an immediate mention of Ghost. And recall our previous discussion of whether or not Ghost can broadcast ideas from the Weirwood net. Looking at the earlier scene that sent Tyrion to the top of the wall, one might wonder if there was some type of force, fate, or the old gods, or perhaps just George R.R. Martin, that wanted Jon and Tyrion to see each other again, and to part as friends. mayhaps for the sake of the realms of men. Almost to illustrate my idea, the scene ends with a pack of wolves howling ominously beyond the wall as they again discuss Benjen. Similar to before, the silent ghost perks up at hearing his wild brethren, but does not join in, at least not audibly. While Jon asserts that he and Ghost can find his missing uncle, Tyrion is worried.
"Give him time," Tyrion said. Far off to the north, a wolf began to howl. Another voice picked up the call, then another. Ghost cocked his head and listened. "If he doesn't come back," Jon Snow promised, "Ghost and I will go to find him." He put his hand on the direwolf's head. "I believe you," Tyrion said, but what he thought was, "And who will go to find you?" He shivered.
Note the affection and the continued shadowing. A Clash of Kings, Tyrion 6. Tyrion is so affected by the scene that he recalls it one book later, further describing it as a dread that had cut like that frigid northern wind.
Tyrion remembered a cold night under the stars when he'd stood beside the boy Jon Snow and a great white wolf atop the wall at the end of the world, gazing out at the trackless dark beyond. He had felt what? Something, to be sure. A dread that had cut like that frigid northern wind. A wolf had howled off in the night, and the sound had sent a shiver through him.
Tyrion and Jon's stories part at this point, which makes this a good stopping point for this episode. We'll see you next time when Jon meets a new friend, Samwell Tarly.
Above my eyes, but once I watched the sword of the morning rise.
Thanks to all the terrific artists who let me use their work on this YouTube video.
Her bell I'd ring in the window, but lies should sing. It's so lonely neath the shade of the wall.
Thanks especially to those of my family who helped in this series so far.
It's so lonely neath the shade of the wall so high.
If you enjoy this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.